What if living near your children in old age isn't the blessing you think it is? What if the very closeness you long for ends up pushing your heart further into loneliness? And what if a quiet Zen story holds the mirror to a truth no one dares to speak? Many believe that as we grow older, the greatest comfort lies in moving closer to our children, to be cared for, to feel surrounded by love, to belong. It sounds like the perfect plan. But is it really? According to the timeless teachings of Zen and Buddhism, this belief may actually be misleading. The Buddha once taught that attachment leads to suffering. Could it be then that in the twilight of our lives, our attachment to family, to closeness, to expectation, might become the very root of our sorrow? Let us take a deeper look through a quiet yet profound Zen story to understand how living near your children might turn out to be one of the most painful decisions of your life. 1. The desire for closeness. There was once an elderly man who had spent his youth and middle years working tirelessly. He built a life, raised children, and provided them with everything he had. As time passed, his once strong body began to falter. His hair turned silver, his hands grew shaky, and the vibrant energy that once filled his days slowly began to fade. His children, now grown, had moved to distant cities, chasing careers, raising families of their own. The house that had once echoed with laughter and the gentle chaos of daily life now stood in silence. Room by room, the quiet began to settle into his bones. Loneliness crept in. He often thought, maybe it's time to be near my children. Maybe then I won't feel so alone. Isn't it their duty to care for their aging parents? Moved by this longing, he packed his few belongings and relocated to a neighborhood not far from one of his sons. At first, it felt like a dream. His grandchildren ran to greet him with open arms. His son and daughter-in-law welcomed him warmly, promising frequent visits. The warmth he had been missing seemed to return like spring after a long winter. But little did he know, this decision, made from a place of hope, would soon begin to test the very peace he had come searching for. 2. The illusion of happiness. In the first few months, he felt pure joy. His children came by on weekends. The grandchildren laughed, played, and filled the house with energy. He thought to himself, this is how old age should be. But as the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of life. The weekend visits became fewer and farther between. His calls were often met with, "I'm busy today," or "I'll stop by tomorrow." The grandchildren who once clung to him now had sports, schoolwork, and their own circles of friends. Days turned quiet again. He found himself sitting alone, listening to the tick of the clock, waiting for a call, waiting for a knock on the door, waiting to be remembered. The happiness he believed would come from proximity to family slowly faded. Though he lived just a few streets away, the emotional distance felt just as vast, if not wider. He no longer felt like a part of their lives, just a guest lingering on the edge of their routines. And one day, after yet another evening passed in silence, after countless evenings spent in quiet longing, one night he finally sat in stillness, trying to understand his own sorrow. What had gone wrong? He had moved closer to his children, yet somehow felt even farther away. The peace he was seeking kept slipping through his fingers. 3. The weight of expectations. As he sat in meditation, observing the stirrings of his own heart, a memory surfaced. The Buddha's words echoed gently in his mind, "Attachment is the root of suffering." And suddenly, a question emerged. Had he become too attached to his children? Had he unconsciously placed his happiness in their hands, hoping they would fill the emptiness he carried? As the days passed, a quiet resentment began to grow in his chest. He had dedicated his entire life to raising his children, working hard, sacrificing, guiding them, and giving them everything he could. Now that he was old and weary, wasn't it only fair that they return the care he once gave? But instead of comfort, this expectation only added to his suffering. His heart grew heavy. He couldn't understand why his children now seemed emotionally distant, why they didn't prioritize him the way he had imagined they would. Wasn't love supposed to be returned? At times, bitterness would surface. Why did I even move here? He would ask himself. If I'm going to be alone again? Is this really what old age is meant to be? A slow fading into the background? Then, one restless night, he dreamt of a wise Zen master. The master looked at him with calm eyes and said, "You are clinging to the idea that your children must satisfy your needs. The more you expect from them, the more you will suffer. Peace does not come from others. It arises from within." He woke with a start. The dream felt more like a teaching than a fantasy. As he sat quietly the next morning, those words stayed with him. Slowly, a new realization began to dawn. 4. The realization of attachment. He began to understand that it wasn't his children's actions that caused him pain. It was his own expectations. He had moved close to them, assuming that physical proximity would naturally lead to emotional closeness. But their lives were already full, filled with responsibilities, families, and careers. They were not his to claim. He had unknowingly placed the burden of his happiness on their shoulders. When they failed to meet the emotional need he never voiced, it led to disappointment. But was it ever their responsibility to fill the emptiness within him? As this truth deepened in his mind, another teaching of the Buddha returned. Nothing belongs to you. Everything you have is borrowed. His children were not his possessions. They were individuals walking their own paths, shaping their own destinies. They had their own joys, sorrows, and struggles. Clinging to them was like trying to grasp water. The tighter he held, the faster it slipped through his fingers. 5. The dangers of dependence. As his understanding grew clearer, he saw another subtle danger: dependence. By choosing to live near his children, he had unintentionally fallen into emotional dependence. Day after day, he waited for their calls, their visits, their presence, hoping they would bring light into his solitude. But in doing so, he had given away his own power. He relied on them for companionship, comfort, and joy. And when those things didn't come, he felt empty, not because they had failed him, but because he had failed to remain rooted in himself. The pain was real, yes, but it wasn't created by his children. It came from the silent belief that his well-being depended on them. With a quieter heart and growing clarity, the elderly man began turning inward. The more he let go of expectations, the more space he found for self-reflection. And then, a memory surfaced, one that would shape the next stage of his transformation. 6. The path to inner peace. One day, while sitting alone beneath the shade of a large tree, the man recalled a story once shared by a traveling Buddhist monk. In the story, a weary traveler was carrying a heavy sack of grain on his back. As he trudged from village to village, he complained about how painful and exhausting the journey was. Yet when someone kindly offered to carry the burden for him, the man refused, saying, "If I do not carry this weight myself, I will never gain the strength to walk on my own." This story echoed deeply in the elderly man's heart. He saw himself clearly in the traveler. He too had been carrying the weight of old age, but instead of bearing it himself, he had unknowingly placed it on his children's shoulders. He had asked them to carry his emotional burdens, his need for attention, his longing for love, his fear of loneliness. And in doing so, he had weakened his own inner resilience. Peace, he realized, would never grow from leaning on others. It had to be cultivated within. 7. The freedom of letting go. That afternoon, as the leaves swayed gently above him and the sun warmed the ground beneath his feet, a final insight dawned on him with quiet clarity. It wasn't the decision to live near his children that had caused him pain. It was his attachment to the belief that they should be the source of his happiness. He remembered the old Buddhist teaching. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. His children loved him, yes, but even their love couldn't give him lasting contentment. That could only arise from his own ability to accept, to let go, and to be present. Not present in some imagined version of life, but in the simple truth of what was. He chose, from that day forward, to shift his perspective. Rather than counting the number of times his children visited or feeling disappointed when they didn't call, he began to nurture gratitude for the small moments, the chirping of birds at dawn, the gentle breeze through the trees, the way the sunlight streamed into his room in the morning, and most of all, the peaceful moments of meditation that brought him back to his center, his own heart. He stopped measuring his happiness by others' actions, and in doing so, he found something surprising: freedom. 8. The gentle power of detachment. As he continued this inward journey, the weight of expectation began to dissolve. He no longer felt the need to control his children's attention or seek constant validation through their presence. He simply let go. And when he did, something beautiful happened. His children sensed the change. The unspoken pressure had lifted. Now, when they visited or called, it wasn't out of obligation, but out of genuine love and ease. Their connection, once clouded by unspoken needs, became natural again, lighter, warmer. The elderly man, having released his attachment, discovered that he now enjoyed their company even more. Not because he needed it, but because he appreciated it. The joy came not from clinging, but from freedom. 9. The lesson of impermanence. Through this experience, he was brought back to one of the most profound teachings of Buddhism, the truth of impermanence. Everything in life changes. Our youth, our health, our relationships. Nothing remains the same. Trying to hold on to anything, whether it's material comforts or emotional connections, only deepens suffering. Because sooner or later, all things must shift. Having embraced the truth of impermanence, the elderly man's heart had begun to soften. He no longer resisted change. He welcomed it. Now, with clarity returning like sunlight after a long rain, he turned inward once more and reflected on his role as a father. 10. Accepting the changing role of a father. He now understood something he had once resisted. His role as a father had changed. The children he once held in his arms, who looked to him for every answer and relied on him for safety and love, had grown into adults. They were no longer the wide-eyed little ones who clung to his leg. They now had their own lives, filled with careers, relationships, responsibilities, and unseen struggles of their own. And that was natural. By accepting the impermanence of roles and relationships, the man found peace. He realized that trying to hold on to the past, to the version of fatherhood he once knew, would only bring sorrow. The more he clung to what once was, the more he closed himself off to what is. He recalled the Buddha's words, "All compounded things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." He reflected deeply on this. His relationship with his children was indeed a compounded thing, a tapestry woven through time, stitched together with shared memories, evolving roles, and changing emotions. It was never meant to remain the same. Just as he no longer needed to guide or protect them, he too had to stop expecting them to give his life meaning. He had his own journey to walk, just as they had theirs, and in this truth, he found release. 11. Finding joy in solitude. Once he had let go of his attachments, the elderly man began to discover something unexpected, a quiet joy that arose from being alone. Solitude, he realized, was not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is a thirst, a craving for attention, for others, for validation. But solitude is peace. It is the gentle contentment that grows when one is truly at home with themselves. He began to cherish the quiet hours he spent in his own company. Mornings became sacred, sipping warm tea while watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. The simple act of tending to a small garden felt meditative. Sitting in silence, eyes closed, breath steady, he felt more alive than he had in years. He no longer measured his days by how often his children called. He stopped waiting for someone else to make him happy. Instead, he filled his time with practices that nourished his spirit. And when his children did reach out, when they visited or called or invited him to join a family dinner, he welcomed it with joy, not dependence. Their presence became a gift, not a need. The Zen teachings came alive in his daily life. He had learned to be present, to truly be in the moment. No longer longing for what could be, no longer lost in memories of what once was. He now saw joy in the smallest things, the rustling of leaves, the distant sound of laughter, the gentle flicker of candlelight during his evening meditations. 12. The wisdom of non-attachment. As he continued to reflect on his path, a deeper understanding of non-attachment settled within him. Buddhism teaches that clinging to people, to objects, to outcomes is a sure path to suffering. Why? Because everything is impermanent. Everything changes. And the more tightly we hold, the more it hurts when it slips away. He now saw that the pain he had once felt wasn't caused by living near his children. It wasn't their actions that had wounded him. It was his own mind, his attachment to the idea that they should always be there for him, meet his needs, prioritize his emotions. He had built silent expectations, and when those expectations weren't met, he felt rejected. But in truth, his children hadn't turned away. They were simply living their lives, doing their best, just as he had once done in his youth. His suffering had come not from their distance, but from his own clinging. By practicing non-attachment, the man began to set himself free. He no longer demanded. He no longer resented. He no longer carried the heavy weight of unmet expectations. And in that release, he found peace. By letting go of attachment and embracing the present, the elderly man no longer felt disheartened when his children were too busy to visit. Instead of longing or disappointment, he welcomed each moment for what it was, complete, just as it was. 13. the full circle of life. In the quiet reflection of his later years, the elderly man began to see the beautiful symmetry of life, how things had gently come full circle. He remembered how, years ago, he had held his children close, cared for them, protected them, and guided them through the uncertainties of youth. He had helped them grow strong, teaching them to walk on their own path. That chapter had been rich with meaning. Now it was his turn. No longer the caregiver, no longer the center of their world. He was called to nurture someone else, himself. In his old age, he realized life had offered him a different kind of responsibility. The responsibility to grow inwardly, to deepen in wisdom, and to live with independence of spirit. Zen Buddhism teaches us that life is a flow of cycles, each one bearing its own purpose and wisdom. His time as an active father had naturally drawn to a close, and in its place, a new cycle had quietly begun, one of personal discovery, serenity, and mindful aging. He was no longer trapped in the identity of being just a father. He was not bound by duties or old emotional patterns. He was simply a human being, walking gently through the last arc of life, with grace in his steps and peace in his heart. 14. The legacy of peace. As the final chapters of his life approached, the elderly man was not afraid. Instead, he was filled with a profound calm, a peace so deep it radiated in everything he did. His relationships with his children had blossomed into something more genuine and free. Not because they visited more often, but because the weight of expectation was gone. When they came, it was out of love, not obligation. When they couldn't, he felt no sadness. Why? Because he knew now, love is not about how often someone is present. It is about the sincerity of the bond that remains. He had come to understand something essential. True love does not cling. It flows. And when we stop trying to control it, we finally allow it to nourish us. As he lay resting in the final days of his life, the elderly man reflected on all he had learned. He remembered the inner battles with loneliness, the longing for connection, the trap of dependence, and the slow journey toward letting go. Through it all, he had come to cherish impermanence rather than fear it. He had not spent his final years chasing happiness through others. Instead, he had turned inward and found contentment in stillness, in simplicity, in now. 15. A life well lived. This is not just a story of one man. It is a mirror for all of us. The journey of the elderly man reminds us that true happiness in old age is not about where we live, nor how close we are to others. It's about how deeply we live, how gracefully we let go, and how peacefully we walk our own path. He left behind not just memories, but a legacy of insight, of peace, and of quiet strength. His life teaches us that the greatest mistake in old age is not physical distance from others, but emotional dependence on them. As the Buddha wisely said, "You yourself must strive." The Buddhas only point the way. The path to peace and happiness is never found in others. It is found in our own hearts and minds. Thank you for joining us on this touching journey. If this story moved your heart or opened your mind, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, Buddhism Seeds. Click the subscribe button below and tap the notification bell so you won't miss future videos on wisdom, peace, and inner growth. And if you'd like to share your thoughts or request topics you'd love to hear next, please leave a comment below. We read everyone with gratitude. Until next time, may peace and clarity guide your every step.